Hi, my name is Ryan Coburn, and I'm going to be discussing Chapter 10, Question 4. In high school, were you able to discuss sexual and relationship issues freely with your parents? How might you hope to do a better job if and when you become a parent? Um, this is actually an area I feel like my parents did pretty well in. They, I always felt very comfortable. Um, Comfortable isn't the right word. I always felt like I could ask them questions. The first conversation I remember, and there were probably conversations before this, but this is the first one I remember. I was watching TV with my dad, and probably something I wasn't supposed to be watching with him. He'd get mad at me for that. But there was a joke about condoms, and the joke didn't make sense, but my dad thought it was funny. And so I asked him, Dad, what are condoms? He goes, well, they are, and he was obviously uncomfortable. He goes, well, they're balloons that men put on their penises. And I was like, what the heck? Like, I couldn't imagine a context where that would happen. Like, why? I thought it was a joke or maybe a funny thing, but who was gonna know? But I was embarrassed about it. Like, oh, I didn't want to know about that. That was maybe 9 or 10 or something like that. And so I didn't ask more. But a little later, my parents got together and kind of gave me a sex talk, and they, not everything, but they addressed that question. They told me about the context that condoms are used in and why they're important, and let me ask more questions. So it wasn't a big, comprehensive sex talk. But I noticed that from then on, my parents were a lot more open about sexuality in our home. That doesn't quite sound right, but I just mean like they made an outward effort to teach us about sex and what's appropriate and what's not. Um, and um, my mother kind of took the lead in these conversations, which is surprising because she's more conservative about sex than my dad. Um, and she would have these conversations every few months where she'd just start talking about sex, and it was always at dinner, almost always, when she had us captive. And she would usually bring it up pretty generically, and she'd start talking about sex, and there were some key points like sex is fun. Sex can be recreational. It's something you do with a partner you trust. Um, it's it's not just for procreation, it's something you do with someone you love. And so those were some really important points that I got out of that, even though those conversations were so embarrassing. They were so hard to get through. But looking back, I think she did a pretty good job at being open, even though she was probably really embarrassed too to talk about those things. Um, and I remember I just always knew like I could ask questions about sex, and I didn't always because it was embarrassing. But if I needed to, if I had questions, I could go to them and ask because there wasn't the same kind of stigma. Yeah, there was still like the embarrassment, but it wasn't like a shame thing. It was just like, it was still like you don't normally talk about sex with your parents. It's uncomfortable. So it was normal, I guess. And I, like many people in this class, grew up in the LDS church. And I just want to emphasize that in my experience and not in everybody's experience. I felt like the church was very, very much, I don't want to say they stigmatized the pleasure of sex, but let's not say they, I felt that the message I was receiving, that sex was only for procreation and you shouldn't do it otherwise. And so since that was my experience, again, because I don't want to put any hate there, um, I felt that having those conversations with my parents helped me separate those two parts, the morality of sex and where sex can be fun and appropriate. And so I got two different educations that were helpful to me and kind of helped me have a balance now that I'm an adult and make my own decisions. Um, One thing, and my parents weren't perfect about sex education, and I feel like the following complaint makes them sound like they were, but they really weren't. But one thing that I would do different is that when I was having sex education classes and learning in a more public environment with my other peers, I noticed that I knew more about sex, and it kind of made me feel dirty. I was like, oh, am I kind of gross for knowing these things that we're learning or having a general idea about them? And so it always kind of made me anxious in those classes because um, other kids didn't know about them. So I wish my parents had kind of respectfully told me that other parents aren't always involved, which that's a hard thing. So no blame, no shame. You People have to learn in all different contexts. And so it wasn't that I was more sexually curious. It was just that, or I guess I just felt more comfortable asking questions and I was able to get information faster because maybe other families weren't as open about that. I hope that doesn't sound judgmental because I don't want it to. But yeah, that is what I would say. Also, just talking more about um, protection and other things. But I think my time's up, so I'll just leave it at that. Thanks as always for listening.